All right. All right. Hey, Shalom to the elect of Israel. I want to start by giving all the praises, honor, and glory to whom it rightfully belongs, which is Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rachakadash. And what I said was all the praises, honor, and glory belongs to Yahweh, who is a heavenly Father, whom the world ignorantly calls God, in the name of his Son, Yahweh Shai, who is the Messiah, whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus, in the name of the Holy Spirit, which in Hebrew is Rachakadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, ever well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect of Israel. And the Spirit hopped on me to go through some history. And hey, man, you know, like me and the head brother down here, in New Jersey, the brother War was saying, because sometimes in the scriptures, it mentions history, as a part of prophecy. Sometimes you see, and the thing is, us in this truth, look, we already believe. Okay, if you're of the elect, you're gonna believe, but you know when you really do, study for yourself, and of course, not going off, making up your own doctrine. I don't mean like that, but as the scriptures say, which I'll get it real quick before I jump into this. And by the way, let me just say before the, ahead of time, because sometimes my computer freezes and I might, the screen might pause or look like it's freezing, right? Or if I have to go on mute, just bear with me and just skip ahead in the video to the part where I continue to talk. Okay, just making that clear. But before I get into the lesson, right, I just want to get this real quick. It's Acts chapter 17 and verse 10, right? Now it says here, and the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas. Let me just it works. And the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night unto Berea, who coming thither went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so. Okay, so basically, these brothers here in the Church of Berea, okay, they basically went and looked up, what was being preached to them themselves. They went and looked it up and searched the scriptures basically to see if what was being said was so. Okay. And our apostles, the elders of Great Millstone, they've preached to us the gospel. Okay. And we had, as well as prophecy as well. Okay. And going through the scriptures and looking into history, regarding prophecy and stuff, it really, and you finding that it aligns up with what it aligns up perfectly or correctly with what's being taught to you. It really, really, really submits your belief, man. It submits your faith that this is true. Okay. And now, once again, like the brother War said, when you do your own studying, then when you hear like a false teacher come along, you're like, you automatically know when they're going off, that they're wrong. You see? So look, so this lesson, okay, is gonna be going into the first woe, man. Okay. I want to, do, Lord willing, um, some lessons going into the three woes. I don't know if I'm gonna do the second woe because it only mentions it in a verse. Okay, but this lesson going into the first woe. Okay. Um, which ultimately, and the thing is, go this covers history. Okay, let me just make the screen total here so you can see it better. Right, which really, man, this covers history. Okay, and look, the history is so vast. It's so much, to look up and understand, man. But it's all part of it. And Lord willing, when this lesson is done, all right, I'm going to make another playlist on my channel, that you could be edified from, going 2 to 3 woes. Okay, that's what the Bible talks about. Now, first, let me go ahead and get this, man. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 1, right? Starting in verse 1. down to verse 3. The revelation of Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, which Yahweh gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John. This was John the apostle that was walking with Yahweh Shai over 2,000 years ago. He's one of the 12 disciples. Verse 2, who bear record of the word of Yahweh and of the testimony of Yahweh Shai HaMashiach and of all things that he saw. Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. You see? So the apostle John, he received visions, okay, on the island of Patmos, and was writing about, recording and writing and sending to the churches, okay, what he wrote. And now those writings that he's done has made it into the Lord has, allowed them to be preserved and, carried over into our world today for us to be edified, all right, and understand prophecy. Okay. So, and let me just get this, because this shows that the scriptures is true, because Apostle John is said to be, let me just get it. How old was the Apostle John when he received the visions of Revelation? It says the exact age of Apostle John when he received the visions of Revelation is unknown, but most scholars estimate it was around 80 to 90 years old, likely in the mid-10th century AD. This estimate is based on a traditional dating of the book of Revelation to the late 1st century, around 95 AD, during the reign of Emperor Domitian. Okay, and I believe Emperor Domitian is also a part of the 12 Caesars that was referenced in 2nd Ezra 11. Salaki if I'm wrong. All right, but basically, the Apostle John, he was around 80 to 90 years old. Okay, and it says, basically this it says evidence supporting this age range, dating of Revelation. The book of Revelation is widely believed by scholars to have been written around 95 AD. So the point is that the Apostle John, when he wrote the book of Revelation, it was way before, what we're about to read happened. So this is a part of prophecy, man. Okay? This is a part of prophecy. All right? So, let's go right into it, man. And I might have to make more than one part because the history is vast. Things, you have to understand things that lead up to things. I'll try to get what I can done now. All right. Within this lesson itself, but things lead up to things, man. There's a lot of history. So once you, like our apostles say, you got to understand the history to understand the mystery. And when you go through this history, man, of different things, and you realize our apostles of Great Millstone and our apostles and elders of Great Millstone, they already know these things. When you understand how vast it is, and then you think about like they know this already, you realize that they know this, but for us, to grasp it, and understand, they give us the understanding, but in concise words. You see, so we can understand, because how it might be for a person to take a lot in at one time. You see, but and again, they tell you, to be a scholar. Go look up, go research. You see. So here we go. Okay. Let me this is the book of Revelation, the 8th chapter. And starting in verse 1, it says, and when he had opened the seventh seal, let me start verse 7. Let me just see something real quick. All right. It's been a minute since I've been on this, on the computer doing these, right? All right. All right. I go to Revelation 8 and 1. Revelation chapter 8 and verse 1, it says, and when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Right. So when the Apostle John was get from, the visions from the visions that he got from Revelation, the 7th chapter, right? After he finished receiving those visions, it was a 30-minute intermission between the visions he got here in Revelation 8. Okay. That's why it says there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. So it's like a intermission for 30 minutes. He didn't, receive any visions. All right. For the space, for the time period of like 30 minutes. Okay. Then it began again. Verse 2. And I saw the seven angels which stood before the Most High, and to them were given seven trumpets. Okay. I'm going to jump down to verse 6. It says, and the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Now, it goes into it, and really, these do with the destruction of America, but, like 1 through 4, do it, really like the destruction of America, okay? But when you read verse 13, okay, it says, and I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. All right. So these, now first we got to understand, what does it mean by woe? What does that mean? We got to look things up, right? So let's get it. Woe.
Strong's G 3759. Uai. Uai.
Why, right? This is the last woe. It says a primary exclamation of grief. Woe. See, now let me go to Edom Online. We got to get all this meat off the chicken, man. All right, let's go to it. See? Woe. All right. It says, woe. A variant of misery, trouble, grief, wretchedness. All right. Let me right now. Let me look it up on Google. Oh wait, right here. Salaki, this thing is moving slow. I ain't cracked this computer open in a minute. Salaki, but it says by late 14th century as a heavy calamity and affliction, a heavy calamity, right? And let me go ahead and look it up on Google. We do look. You got to, be, as a brother said, fully persuaded in your mind, man. Now, woe, great sorrow or distress, often used hyperbolically. Things that cause sorrow, distress, but woe is like great sorrow, meaning heavy, a lot, a big amount of sorrow, distress, trouble. That's what woe means. Okay. And in the scriptures is mentioned a lot of woe. All right, just in general. These specific three woes in Revelation 8 is talking about something specific. All right, but in the scriptures, uh, woe, like destruction, doom, is talked about a lot. This is Ezekiel chapter 2, starting in verse 9. And when I looked, behold, an hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein, and representing the Bible. And he spread it before me, and it was written within and without. Because when you look in the Bible, it's written in. The Bible is written in. And there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe. And these are basically all things that point to sorrow, doom, gloom. Because in the scriptures, that's what's talked about. A lot of judgment, disaster, calamity, doom. But there goes that word woe again. See, let me look it up here. Woe basically, you could say means death and destruction. But it says chaya. Lamentation, wailing. Look it up in the lexicon. All right. All right, so I'm going to put it on no more. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back. Revelation chapter 8, verse 13 again. And it says, and I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe. And he says it what? 3 times. And I mean, some brothers already know what this means. But if you don't, right? I'm going to just continue reading and explain what it means. It says, to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels which are yet to sound. So, woe, these 3 woes represent basically, all right, what it is, all right, because I got some notes here on my phone. All right, so I want to have things organized. So the prophecies of three woes. So this verse prophesies of three woes to happen on earth. And these are, three, and what these are three world wars prophesied to happen on earth. That's why it says woe three times. And a world war is what? Doom, gloom, okay, death, destruction. All right. And it says it three times. Okay. So, and this is at the end of this chapter, right? Now, so after this, so being at, the last three trumpets, okay, which each trumpet, representing the woe, okay. Um, Let me just say, each woe representing a world war. All right. At the end of this chapter, it mentions the scriptures prophesy three world wars to happen on earth. Okay. So when we go to the next chapter, Revelation 9, all right, from the first verse, and what you're going to find out, this is, what it's definitely talking about is World War One here. But from Revelation chapter 9, verses 1 through 12, it mentions World War One. Now the scriptures don't, go into what World War Two is, but as Apostle Ramlab stated, it mentions it in a verse. Remember, the three woes represent or are prophecies. Bear with me 1 second. The three woes represent prophecies of um, three world wars to happen on the planet Earth, man. All right. So when it says one woe is past, right, meaning World War One is already past. It says, "And behold, there come two woes more hereafter." World War One, World War Two, and three. See, and this, and once again, the scriptures don't go into World War Two, in depth, right, like they do one and three, but it mentions it in a verse. And after reading this, you're gonna find out that that these last three woes are definitely talking about world wars, man. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get right to it, man. All right. So Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Now we gotta understand what the bottomless pit is. All right. I'm gonna put a lot of things into perspective here so we understand what we're talking about. We understand what this is saying. All right. Bottomless pit. Now we go to second Ezra, and once again, I'm gonna try to get what I can done. All right, I'm more than likely gonna have to make this into a multi-part lesson. All right, because there's a lot of history in this. Okay, but sticking with this on topic because it said bottomless pit. Now in second Ezra, the fifth chapter, right? This is the prophet Ezra, being told things and going back and forth with the angel, talking, right? But he also was speaking here. Now this is second Ezra chapter 5, starting at verse 20. It says, "And so I fasted 7 days, mourning and weeping, like as Uriel the angel commanded me." So he was talking with an angel, right? So he had to fast 7 days afterward, mourn and weep and all that. Verse 21, "And after 7 days, so it was that the thoughts of my heart were very grievous unto me again, and my soul recovered the spirit of understanding. And I began to talk with the Most High again, and said, O Lord, that bearest rule of every wood of the earth." So Ezra, is talking to the Lord, right? And said, O Lord, that bearest rule of every wood of the earth, and of all the trees thereof, thou hast chosen the one only vine. Right? So now, he continues to go into the Lord's favorites. Okay? Verse 24. Because the Lord has favorites just like we do. Verse 24, "And of all, here's a point, and of all lands of the whole world, thou hast chosen thee one pit, and of all the flowers thereof, one lily." But the point is, it said, and of, let me just make it bigger, right? "And of all lands of the whole world, thou hast chosen thee one pit." So it referenced, and it referenced a land to a pit. What Ezra is saying here is that the Lord has out of all lands of the world, the Lord has a favorite land, and that land is the land of Israel. Okay, but it references a land to what? A pit. Okay, and I've never done this before. Let me just look up the definition of the word pit. All right, got to look up words, man. Okay. I thought it might have had said it here. Nah, it doesn't say it. All right, they just go with the common thought of it, you know, being a hole in the ground. But with this understanding, we know that what a land can be referenced to as a pit. So when we read Revelation, the ninth chapter, right, when it talks about the bottomless pit, and it also talks about the bottomless pit, Revelation 20 and 17, etc. You know, what this is referencing to is Europe, okay? Because remember, a bottomless pit is not, it's not talking about a literal hole in the ground that doesn't end. It's talking about a land. As we read here, a land can be referred to as a pit. All right. So this bottomless pit is talking about Europe. Why? Because of Europe's lack of natural resources, man. All right. You know, you're not gonna find that real that nutrient richness in the land of Europe. Okay. Now, when we deal with Europe, let's understand some. Once again, putting things in a perspective. This all helps you understand, in all right, on map. So we gotta understand what is Europe. You know, because a lot of people don't understand what Europe is. Okay. Now, well, that's the European Union. No, right? So you could say this. Okay. You know, this over here. You know, all this, man, all that, Europe. Okay. And I believe you have Eastern Europe. Let me just get that. Eastern Europe on map. Oh, you got Eastern, Central, and Western Europe. You know, just trying understanding some things. All right, you got Eastern Europe. Let me just type in what is Eastern Europe. What is considered Eastern Europe? All right. Well, not to drag it on, but real quick, on the overview, Eastern Europe doesn't have a precise, universally accepted definition, but generally includes countries like Belarus, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Ukraine, and the western part of Russia. All right. So, you know, you have that. Then you have what? You got Central Europe. Okay. What is considered Central Europe? Central Europe is basically like, in the middle, right here, Germany, Poland, Austria, I know I just mentioned Poland, but it said basically like the definitions kind of like vary as where to set like borders and stuff, where it's at. All right, but like around Germany, Austria, like right in the middle. Then you have, Western Europe. What is considered Western Europe? Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Monaco, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. All right. You know, um, so basically just Europe, man. All right. That's what the bottomless pit is, Europe. And when you go through history, when you understand what's been going on over here, boy, you're gonna, and then you realize that it refers to this as the bottomless pit. In the context we're about to read about, you're gonna understand that the bottomless pit is most definitely Europe. All right, but it's the bottomless pit. It's called the bottomless pit because of its lack of natural resources. All right. Now let's continue on. Revelation chapter 9, verse 2 now. So we understand that. Bottomless pit is Europe. Verse 2. And he opened the bottomless pit. So now it's going into the first woe. Because remember at the end, it says one woe is past. So, we're just going into the first woe here. Verse 2, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. All right, and this represents World War One, beginning. Okay, and what is a world war? There we go. Let me just get right here on Wikipedia. It says a world war is an international conflict that involves most or all of the world's major powers. You know, for example, like the U.S. Some examples of the major powers like America, China, Russia, etc. Conventionally, the term is reserved for the two major international conflicts that occurred during the first half of the 20th century. World War One, which we'll be going into, all right? From really 1914 to 1919, okay? And World War II, 1939 to 1945, although some historians have, all right, so that's basically it, okay? This represents World War One beginning. Now, the bottomless pit. Now, before we, get into this, we got to understand some history, right? Now, you need to understand first that there was something called what? Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? Let me just type in what was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, okay? Now it says the Austro-Hungarian or Austro, okay, Hungarian Empire was a Central European dual monarchy formed in 1867 by the Austro-Hungarian Compromise, uniting the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary under a single monarch. So basically what this is you could say two kingdoms united under one ruler, okay? Now, let's look up these places. Um, Austro-Hungary on map. All right. And keep in mind, this is in Europe, the bottomless pit. All right. Because you're going to see how this, translates into World War One. All right. So this is, the territory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, man. Okay. And it said, what? A dual monarchy. What is a dual monarchy? All right. It says a dual monarchy is a political union. Union meaning, basically them coming together, right? So basically, a dual monarchy is a uniting of two distinct kingdoms or states. So a uniting of two kingdoms, right, that share the same monarch, meaning that they have one ruler, but otherwise maintain their own governments, constitutions, and internal affairs. Okay. And it says the most well-known example is the Austro-Hungarian Empire from 1867 to 1918. That's what we're going into, right? And a single monarch, as it says here, one person rules as the head of state for both distinct entities. So what this is two different kingdoms united under one ruler, okay? And this is the territory, okay? You see, and once again, this is in Europe, the bottomless pit. All right. Not saying that, this territory of this empire itself is the bottomless pit. No. Europe, as we just went through, okay, is the bottomless pit. All right. Now, let me just see what it says down here because it should say right here. It's the Compromise of 1867. This agreement granted Hungary significant internal. Let me just, because I want to get to a certain point before I got a dip. All right. You know, I want to make a certain, I want to, get to a certain point in this lesson before, uh, I gotta go. All right. But let me type in what was the Austro-Hungarian compromise of 1867. All right. And it said the Austro-Hungarian compromise. Oh man, here we go. Not interested. Get the hell out of here. All right. It says the Austro-Hungarian compromise of 1867, known as the Ausgleich. And I don't know how to pronounce certain words we're going to see. But basically it says this was a political agreement that transformed the Austrian Empire into the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. So basically all this compromise, this Austro-Hungarian compromise of 1867, right? As it says here, creating a unified state for these matters, but a dual structure, basically a unified state. Basically, what it did, it took these two kingdoms and united it into one. Okay, that's basically what it did. All right, and it was finalized on when was it finalized? Um, I saw February, but it says the compromise finalized on May 29th, 1867. All right. So that's the date when empire officially began. All right. So boom. Now let's get that out of here. So being that this was two kingdoms, right? What were the territories of the Austro? And by the way, just look, buckle up because it's gonna be some history, man. You're gonna go through. You see? People be saying the scriptures is fake, but they don't understand the Bible. What were the territories? Because the Bible talks about history. And even, historians that don't agree with the Bible, they agree with history though. And the Bible talks about it. And has talked about it the scriptures talked about it way before it happened. All right. All right. So let me just type this in. What was cis and trans? All right. So it says Cisleithania and Transleithania were the two main halves of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Remember, this is two kingdoms, right? So you got one part belonging to Austria and one part belonging to Hungary. It says created by the compromise which we just read. Cisleithania meaning on this side of the Leitha, which is a river, meaning on this side of the Leitha River, which basically separated territories. It says referred to the Austrian ruled lands, while Transleithania, meaning on the other side of the Leitha, was a name for the lands of the Hungarian crown. So basically, once again, you got. Let me just look for a picture. All right, this could work. All right, so boom. All right, you got Cisleithania and Transleithania. Okay, Austria, Hungary. Right, and they were united. But you had some lands that were under Austria and some lands that were under Transleithania, right? And this is where I believe Transleithania also had Transylvania in it, you know. But anyways, moving on. Okay, so now there's a lot of stuff you can go into, but you gotta focus, right? So now let's go to what was because there was something called what Congress of Berlin, right? So it says the Congress of Berlin was an 1878 diplomatic meeting of major European powers, including Germany, Austria-Hungary, Britain, France, and Russia. It said what? Austria-Hungary, right? It said Britain, France, and Russia that revised the Treaty of San Stefano following the Russo-Turkish War. Now, I just want to get into something, okay? So when you go look this up, Wikipedia, right? So, and by the way, Congress, it doesn't just mean the White House in the U.S. Okay. Let me just get this real quick. Congress definition. All right, Congress. It says it's not just the part of the United States government, man. Congress, because Berlin is not even in America, but this is Congress. A formal meeting or series of meetings for discussion between delegates, especially those from a political party or labor union or from within a particular discipline, a society or organization, especially, but the action of what? Coming together. All right. That's what Congress means. Basically coming together. Okay. And in this sense, it was with representatives and everything. All right. So this was a meeting of these representatives over there in Berlin, in Europe, right? And who attended basically was Russia, as it says here, attended by delegates or representatives from Europe's then six great powers: Russia, um, Great Britain, France, Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Germany. The Ottomans, as well as representatives of four Balkan states: Greece, Serbia, Romania, and Montenegro. Right. So these are the people. These are the states that were involved in this meeting, okay, by their representatives, right? So it says the Congress or this meeting culminated, means it reached the point of what was called the Treaty of Berlin. And it, by the way, this Congress was from June 13th to July 13th of the year 1878, right? So the Congress culminated in what was called the Treaty of Berlin, right? Now, let me just see if it's here. I'm trying to get to. All right. So, all right. So, I'm going to go ahead and click this one because the answer is down there a little bit. All right. Sloppy. Where is it? No, I'm going to just type it up here. AI overview, man. It gets it done fast. What? So remember, it was a meeting between these representatives that came together over a course of time, right? And it resulted in what was called the Treaty of Berlin, and this had different terms. So what were the terms of the Treaty of Berlin? Okay. Right. Now, let me just see, because I'm looking for the part where it says it, specifically. Okay. You know what? I could just pull it up in the article itself. Treaty of Berlin, Article 25. All right. So remember, this meeting resulted in Treaty of Berlin, which had different terms. Okay. Now, when we go to Article 25, here's the point. It says the provinces of Bosnia and Herzegovina shall be occupied and administered by Austria-Hungary. Let me just look up the term administered, because we got to understand what's going on here, right? Administer says manage and be responsible for the running of, right? So to control it, right? Now, so that was literally in the terms, okay? Now, you also had Serbia around this time, all right, which was a whole another state, right? and you have these, Slavic people, you know, because that's really, what I want to get at. All right, if I go back here, all right. So basically, what part of this treaty had done, because let me just try to get it. Who? Let me just type this in. Where? Slovakia. Where is Bosnia and Herzegovina on the map? Right. Remember, this is right around, the same part that the Empire of Austria-Hungary was in, right? Right here. See? Right there. Austria-Hungary. Okay? Boom. All right. And that was the capital city, Sarajevo, if I'm saying that right. But keep this in mind. Keep that city in mind because that's going to be important for this. And keep and this is, what we're going through, what we're going to find out, this is all the Lord was working behind the scenes, man. So let me move it along, all right, because time is flying. All right, I'm only got a little bit of other notes down here. Okay. So let me go back here. The Congress of Berlin, right? All right. So right here, boom. Body held by Shah says this agreement, right? Matter of fact, before I say that, so we got Bosnia and Herzegovina, okay, over there in Europe. And we type in who was living in Bosnia and Herzegovina in before World War I, right? And really, he was Slavic people. Now, let me just get that, all right? Because this is before World War I. Bosnia and Herzegovina's population consisted mainly of Bosniak Muslim, Orthodox Serbs, Roman Catholic Croats, right? Let me type in were there Slavs in Bosnia and Herzegovina before World War I. All right. It says, yes, there were Slavic people in Bosnia and Herzegovina long before World War One. As they began settling in the region in the 6th and 7th centuries, early Slavic tribes such as the and Croats migrated to the area and eventually formed kingdoms. By the time of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right, says which ruled Bosnia and Herzegovina until after World War I, the population was overwhelmingly Slavic because you have what's known as Eastern, Western, and Southern Slavs. Okay, and it's where you get the term, Eastern or Slavic women. All right. But anyways, it says Slavic people are historically divided into East Slavs, Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians. All right. You get the map, in that area, right? We consider, the Eastern Slavic people, West Slavs, Poles, Chechiks, and Slovaks. I'm saying that right. And the South Slavs, Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, remember, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenians, Macedonians, Montenegrins, Bulgarians. Okay. So basically, right, before Austria-Hungary had occupied that land, as we read, or was, allowed to occupy that land, you had Southern Slavs, Southern Slavic people living in that land. Okay. Which I believe they are Edomites. Okay. But yeah. All right. So it says what? This agreement, this Treaty of Berlin, essentially dismantled the greater autonomous Bulgarian state envisaged at San Stefano, right? And reorganized the borders of southeastern Europe. Here's the point. The main results, the main results were the Austro-Hungarian forcible occupation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? That's the point. This basically allowed the Austro-Hungarian Empire to have that land. Now, where I just saw that. Okay. Um Where is it? Okay, you know, bear with me 1 second. Just looking through the notes here. And also another thing this treaty did, this Treaty of Berlin, type this in, did the Treaty of Berlin uh, also recognize the Kingdom of Serbia as independent Ottoman rule. Right? So it says, yes, the Treaty of Berlin in 1878 officially recognized the independence of Serbia from the Ottoman Empire. Right? Which you're going to have to remember that. Let me just put up Serbia on the map. Kingdom of Serbia map. Right? All sound around the same region of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Right? So, this is Serbia, down here. Okay, Austro-Hungarian Empire was up here, but with this Treaty of Berlin, this gave the Austro-Hungarian Empire it allowed them to occupy and basically govern this land of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is a very important spot. This is just background knowledge before we get to the this background knowledge that's going to help you understand more about how this first war started, how everything happened. You got to once again know the history to understand the mystery. Okay, go this is like basically a history lesson. Okay, now let me just type this in. So basically, what we got so far, right? The Treaty of Berlin, that Congress, that meeting, right, which all those different representatives of the different states and all of that in Europe, came together. What it resulted in was a Treaty of Berlin, having a bunch of different terms, but in this, what we focusing on is how it gave the Austro-Hungarian Empire, um, basically control of Bosnia and Herzegovina, to occupy it and govern over it, all that. See, and before and the people that were here were Southern Slavic people. Okay, it was Southern Slavic people, right? But they were divided by religion. You have Muslim Bosnians, ethnic Serbs, ethnic Croats. It was multi ethnic. They were just divided by religions. Okay, now, so being that area, now follow along. Don't lose me here. All right. Now, being that this area was given to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? What did it say up here? It said the main results of, what this Treaty of Berlin did, the main results were the Austro-Hungarian forcible occupation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Okay? So the forcible occupation of it, all right? Which just began, as it says, from July 29th of 1878 and lasted to October 20th of 1878. And basically what this did, right? So after, that territory was given to the empire, what that did was, basically the empire, automatically, started invading that area from the north and the south to control it. It says the Austro-Hungarian army entered the country in two large movements, one from the north into Bosnia, up here, okay, and another from the south into Herzegovina. I believe that's like down here, okay? And it says a series of battles in August culminated in the fall of Sarajevo on August 19th. After a day of street-to-street fighting in the hilly countryside, a guerrilla campaign continued until the last rebel stronghold fell after their leader was captured. All right, so basically, they got resistance. All right, the people didn't like that, for they had a bunch of different reasons, why they didn't want the people, the empire, moving in there. Okay, but remember, the Treaty of Berlin recognized the independence of Serbia. Okay, let me just type something in. What were Slovakia? Was Serbia Slavic? 1878. It says yes, Serbia was predominantly Slavic, as the Serbs are a South Slavic ethnic group native to southeastern Europe. All right. It says who migrated to the region in the early medieval period. By 1878, the Principality of Serbia, which gained its formal independence from the Ottoman Empire at the Congress of Berlin, had a population that was about 85% Serb. So they were Slavic people. Okay, Serbia was Slavic people. Okay, remember this Treaty of Berlin recognized them. Okay, as being independent from Ottoman rule. All right, so it recognized them as an independent state. Just remember that. Okay. So the fact that it gained its independence, right? Um, Let me just type this in. Let's see what it did. And what did this do? Right? Um, it says yes, the treaty. So I typed in, did the Treaty of Berlin also recognize the Kingdom of Serbia as independent from Ottoman rule? And what did it do? So it says yes. So basically, because the treaty recognized them as being independent, recognized the Kingdom of Serbia as being independent. Part of what this did, it says nationalist aspirations. The formal recognition of independence validated Serbia's nationalistic aspirations. Nationalism means that you know you are basically for your country. You're for your nation, people, and everything, right? So then, let me just type this in. Did Serbia envision a quote unquote greater Serbia? And what was it? Right? Now it says yes, the idea of a greater Serbia has been significant nationalist. Let me just actually type this in. Hold on. Let's see what comes up. Bear me real quick. All right. Now it says Serbia was first recognized as a fully independent state at the Congress of Berlin in 1870s. Now you should know what that is. After achieving autonomy earlier in the 19th century, however, the concept of a greater Serbia predates its independence. All right. Now it says it predates it, but it was still, going on during this time. So basically, um, the fact that Congress of Berlin recognized it as being independent, you know, they let me read this. They basically envisioned what's called a greater Serbia. It says a vision of a greater Serbia has existed as a nationalist and irredentic ideology throughout Serbia's history, not only after it was recognized independent. Different iterations of the idea have laid claim to various territories based on historical rule, ethnic Serbs living outside of Serbia's borders, or strategic economic interests. So now we type this in. What was Greater Serbia? All right. Um, it says Greater Serbia is a Serbian nationalist and irredenticide ideology aimed at creating a single state that incorporates all the territories historically considered significant to Serbs, including those outside modern day Serbia that are partly populated by Serbs. The hour in. Hey, Salakia, you know, like I said, computer sometimes be you know, freezing and whatnot. All right, but you know, definitely gonna have to make this a multi-part lesson, man. Most definitely. Okay, but I'm gonna get as far as we can. Basically, we're talking about how Serbia was recognized as independent. Did had in the fact, that they had an idea, all right, called Greater Serbia. Now, let me type this in. What was Greater Serbia? Basically, what this. Let me just type it in a little different. The idea of Greater Serbia, or was the idea of Greater Serbia to unite all Slavic peoples? Um, Hold on one second, Slovakia. Oh, Slovakia. South Slavic people. It says here, okay. I just got to read this one. All right, but the idea of Greater Serbia, not Yugoslavism, right? It says this idea aimed to create a unified state for all Serbs, which would encompass territories outside of modern Serbia with significant Serb population and historical significance. Now, this is going to be important to understand. Okay, this was an idea that they wanted a unified state and all of that, right? These Serbs, right, which are Slavic people, they wanted a unified state for all Serbian people. Okay, you know, and let me just type this in. All right, now remember, they got the And by the way, when Austro-Hungary, invaded the area of Bosnia Herzegovina, right, which was inhabited by Slavic people, they got the land. Okay, they got the territory, right? You know, so let me just so being that they got the territory, so let me just get it. Did Austria, Austro-Hungarian Empire acquire Bosnia Herzegovina? Right? It says yes. The Austro-Hungarian Empire officially annexed it, right, in 1908. After we're gonna get to that. After having occupied and administered the provinces since 1878. So following the Treaty of Berlin. So they already had it. Okay. You know, they already had the area. They occupied it. Okay. They already had hands in that area. So basically, they had that, but Serbia, okay, this idea of a greater Serbia. Let me just type this in. Did the idea of greater Serbia threaten the Austro-Hungarian Empire? It says yes, the idea of a greater Serbia was a major threat to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was seen as an existential danger that fueled the rivalry between the two powers and ultimately triggered World War One. Right. The idea of Greater Serbia to make a unified state for all Serbs, that was a threat to the empire. All right, for multiple different reasons, but it was a threat, and they tried to they tried to you know, curb it. All right, you will find out. But it says here why the stabilization of the multi-ethnic empire. Austria-Hungary was a large multinational empire with a sizable South Slavic population, including Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Serbian nationalism and a dream of a greater Serbia unifying the South Slavs into a single state. See, it was about unifying them, right? Directly threatened to inspire secessionists. Let's type this in. What is secessionist? It says a person who favors formal withdrawal from a membership of a federation or body, especially political state. You know, basically someone who wants to break off from like an empire or something like that, or a greater state or something, right? It says directly threaten and inspire secessionist movements among its subjects. If the Serbs within Austria-Hungary were to break away, it could encourage other ethnic groups to do the same, leading to the empire's collapse. So it was a threat, okay? And around this time, Serbian nationalism was spreading, okay? It was spreading, right? Now, let me just type this in. And they're probably going to, try to word it different. Now, did the idea of a greater Serbia cause secret societies? This is all going to link up. Once again, this is all going to link up, okay? It says, yes, the idea of a greater Serbia directly inspired the creation of secret societies and paramilitary groups, most notably the Black Hand. These organizations were dedicated to uniting all ethnic Serbs into a single state, often resorting to violence and terrorism to achieve their goals. See, so this idea of a greater Serbia, influenced people to be for that idea. It influenced certain Serbian peoples, to be for that idea. All right, of making a unified state for all, for Southern Slavic people and uniting them. Right, it influenced those ideas and it made secret societies like the Black Hand, which is you could say a bunch of different groups. Okay, and this is going to all tie in, man. You got to know the background history. Once again, you got to hear me say that a lot. Okay, so when the Black Hand was founded in 1911. All right, let me just get that. What was the Black Hand group? It says the Black Hand, Unification or Death, was a secret Serbian military society founded in 1911 by army officers to unite all South Slavs into a single Serbian-led nation. The group was responsible for the assassination. I don't want to, I'm not just know it was founded in 1911. Okay, and there was also another group called let me type in what were the young Bosnian. All right, or Bosnia. It says young Bosnia. All right, was a revolutionary movement of young people in the early 20th century, primarily students who sought to liberate Bosnia and Herzegovina from Austro-Hungarian rule and unite all South Slavs into a single Yugoslav state. See, so this was all that nationalism going on. You had, remember, that area of Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? Slovakia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, okay, on map, right? Remember, this area here, okay, was being occupied by the Hungarian Empire, okay, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? It was being occupied by them, man, okay? And, but it wasn't officially a part of the empire yet, okay? And around this time, when all this was going on that we're talking about, the Black Hand and everything, it was a lot of Serbian nationalism going on, to unite Southern Slavs. You had those secret society groups that formed back then, like the Black Hand, the young Bosnia, all right, which are all, pro-Slav unification and anti-Austro-Hungarian Empire. They were for, having a Slav, a Slav state, a South Slav state, and they were against, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? And this group, the young Bosnian, they were connected to the Black Hand. All right, they weren't a part of the Black Hand, but they were connected to it. Okay, so now fast forwarding Let's type in, what did the Austro-Hungarian Empire do on October 5th, 1908? Now, here we go. Listen closely. It says on October 5th, 1908, the Austro-Hungarian Empire received an announcement from the neighboring um wait. Yeah, it says announcement from the neighboring country of Bulgaria, which declared its independence from the Ottoman Empire. This event coincided with Hungary's decision to formally annex, which means to add, the territories of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which it had long administered but were still considered part of the Ottoman Empire. So basically, what this did, what they did was add that area of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That area, which had all them, all those nationalist, Slavic people, they wanted to add that, or no, not wanted to. They did. They added it to their empire. Okay, and boy, oh boy, you know. Let me just type this in. What happened? Let me just let's just look this up. It says the Bosnian crisis. Okay. Let me just first type this in. So they added it. All right, let's just first get that. It says the Bosnian crisis, or the first Balkan crisis, erupted on October 5th, 1908, when Austria-Hungary announced the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, territories within the sovereignty of the Ottoman Empire, but under Austro-Hungarian administration in 1878. So they added that area to their empire. Now Bosnia and Herzegovina was a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All right. Let me just type this in. Why did the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina anger the peoples there? Why did it upset them? Because it did, right? It says, I'm gonna just get right to it. Threat to Serbian nationalism. Serbia, right? Let me just get it so we can, understand. Serbia, Kingdom of Serbia on map, right? Make sure everything's running smooth. Let me just put it full screen. All right. So here, okay, Kingdom of Serbia, right? Bosnia and Herzegovina is like around here, okay? It's like around here. All right. Let me get this one. Okay. Okay, here it is up here. All right. So why did the empire add in that area anger them? It says Serbia had aspirations to unite all South Slavs under its leadership, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was, had a bunch of Southern Slavic people living in there. It says with its large ethnic Serb population, right, was seen as crucial to this goal. Right. Basically, they wanted to, once again, unify, make a law, remember, they wanted to have great Serbia. That idea, of uniting all South Slavs into a single Serbian state, you know, they had that idea, but the fact that the empire, officially added that area to the empire, that shut down that dream of having a greater Serbia. You see, and this angered the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Okay, you know that angered them. Okay, so that's why you have the Bosnian crisis. Says this unilateral action, time to coincide with Bulgaria's independence. Uh, says from the Ottoman Empire on October 5th sparked protestations from all the great powers in Austria-Hungary's Balkan neighbors, Serbia and Montenegro. Okay. It says, so, that Serbia became furious and everything, right? In April 1909, the Treaty of Berlin was amended to reflect the fight accomplished and bring the crisis to an end. Although the crisis ended with what appeared to be a total Austro-Hungarian diplomatic victory, look at this. Although the crisis, because it was just like protesting going on. Let me just type in, um, what was the Bosnian crisis? The Bosnian crisis was a diplomatic conflict between 1908 and 1909, triggered by Austria-Hungary's annexation or addition of Bosnia and Herzegovina to what? To the empire. It's called the Bosnian crisis because they added it to the empire. Okay, and this, set off a crisis. Okay, you know, and it cemented that it cemented that you know it cemented that what's the word for it? That hostility, the animosity between Serbia and the empire, basically. Okay, so there is it. All right, so hope you following along. Okay, see how all these details add up. You had to know what the Treaty of Berlin, the Congress of Berlin, what the Congress, all right, that we went to, which ended in the Treaty of Berlin, what that meant. Austria-Hungary, all this stuff is adding up. It's coming to a head. Okay, remember at the same time, Jake is going through the 350 years prophesied about in Revelation 11 on the other side of the world. In America, at the same time. This is like, because 350 years, that was from what, 1619 to 1969. We's dealing in 1914, 1908, 1878. We around this time period. You see? So Jake is still, getting, that foot up their ass on the other side of the world for the most part. Okay? While all this was going on. So even while that was happening, the Lord was still working out prophecy. Okay? So it says in the long term help lay the grounds for World War One. All right. So basically, that happened. Okay. Now I want to jump ahead now, okay? Because I'm gone over the time limit. All right. And you know, it's already an hour and 15. It doesn't even feel like an hour and 15 minutes to me, man. Okay. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this next fact. Okay. And keep in mind also too that while all this was before World War I broke out, right? But you're gonna get to exactly when it broke out. While this was going on, not only what we're talking about here was the reason it broke out, but there were also, longer term reasons that it broke out. Because you had something called Maine. Let me type this in. What was Maine? It says, what was Maine? Maine refers to militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. A mnemonic, or how you say it, a mnemonic acronym used to remember the four major underlying causes of World War One. Right? So it says these long-term factors created an unstable environment in Europe that, when combined with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, led to the outbreak of the war. Right? We're going to get that in a minute. So here's a breakdown of each factor. Militarism, which is what? A belief in building up strong armed forces and using military power to achieve national interests. Right? And you had these different countries in Europe, like Germany, Austria-Hungary, France, Britain. You know, you had these you had these they were all basically going through that. Okay, but Germany, right, maintained a large army, and this I'm gonna get to this real quick. Okay, how did Germany participate in militarism? It says Germany's participation in militarism included a cultural acceptance of military authority, which grew with its unification in 1871. Under Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany pursued world policy, which means world policy, emphasizing military expansion and naval buildup, leading to a naval arms race with Britain. This shift towards militarism, with the military gaining significant influence of government, escalated tensions and contributed to the outbreak of World War One. All right. So basically, and this man Kaiser Wilhelm, he was prophesied about in the scriptures too. Okay, but basically, right, Germany, um, they also had a large draft, conscription. They started building up their artillery, their weaponry, they started building all that up. They had a naval arms race with Britain, right? And this also explains to why later on you're going to hear about dogfighter planes from Germany in World War One, which the scriptures talk about. Okay, in Revelation 9. See, this is all underlying things. You see, so let me just get it real quick and then get to the point. So militarism, not only Germany was doing militarism, but you had other countries doing it. Alliances. It says a system of interlocking agreements between nations for their mutual defense, which alliances, like banding up together. That's why when you look this up, who were the two coalitions of World War One? Coalitions basically means like team. But who were the two teams? Okay, so basically it says the two main coalitions of World War One were the Allies, and also known as the Entente powers and the Central powers. Right. So you had basically two sides: the Allies and the Central powers. The Allies are also called the Entente powers. That's how you say it. But you say the Allies and the Central powers. The Allies originally, all right, initially started off, with France, Great Britain, including its empire, and Russia. Later, Italy and Japan and the U.S. joined. Then, they also had Serbia, Belgium, Greece, Portugal, and Montenegro, right? That's one side that was fighting in World War One versus this side, the Central Powers, which the initial members were who? Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, which is Turkey and Bulgaria, right? Italy was initially a part, but it switched sides later on in 1915. Okay, but you know, basically, when you read Maine, and the A in Maine stands for alliances, because these countries, for example, the Allies, these countries all started, linking up with each other before World War One broke out. You see, and the Central Powers, same thing for them. The countries here on this side all started linking up together before World War One. So when it broke out, all these countries were drawn into World War One. You see, imperialism, which is basically like countries, fighting over colonization and territories, you know, before World War One. These different European countries that we're talking about here, right? They were before the war broke out, they were fighting over different countries around the world. Like you had this was called the scramble for Africa, right? And they were fighting, being that they were fighting over these countries, it made rivalries between them. You see, and nationalism. It says an intense form of patriotism and the desire for national independence, which fostered rivalries and a belief that one's nation was superior to others. So you had a lot of people that, you know, um, was all into their nation, all for their nation. You see, you know, and some quick examples. I gotta end it, but some quick examples of imperialism were the scramble for Africa. There were also, you know, in the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire fought the Allies group, the Allies coalition, right? Germany tried to invite uprisings against Britain and France. Japan took German colonies in China. And the Ottoman Empire wanted to expand its influence by calling for a jihad against Britain and France. So, that's an example of imperialism. So all these things, all right, think of a powder keg and a spark, and the powder keg being Maine, right? All these reasons, these were the four major reasons that the Lord had stir up, you know, for World War One. But there was a spark, and that's what we're gonna get to. See, but these were like the these were what these European countries were doing, all right, which ultimately, made it look like war was coming. You see, that a world war was coming, right? Which once again, a world war is basically the world's major powers fighting each other. Okay, so once again, this was the countries were building up their military, making alliances, fighting over territories, and they had people all for their nation and everything. All of that, factored into World War One. But there was something that officially triggered World War One, which we're about to get to, and I'm gonna end it, man. I'm gonna get a couple scriptures to end it. All right, but you had uh, so where we was going back to, you had the Bosnian crisis. Okay, so then jumping ahead, you had where the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1908 added that area to the empire. Okay, which angered, you know, um, all the Serbia, right? You know, and ultimately this, that set off the Bosnian crisis, right? Which began in 1908, ended in 1909. When did the Bosnian crisis start and end? It says the Bosnian crisis of 1908 started on October 5th, 1908. I'm gonna just read here. It says it concluded on March 31st, 1909. So that's when it began and ended. But still that they still had that that anger with each other. Okay. So basically, as you keep on reading, all right, and by the way, let me just get this because I meant to get this a while ago, Slovakia. All right, but the Austrian Empire, right? Let me just type this in. Who was the first emperor of Austria Hungary? It was a man by the name of Franz Joseph the First. This guy, okay, he was the first emperor. All right, and from 1830 to 1916. Okay, but let me just type this in. So he was the first emperor. Okay. Um, Let me just type this in real quick. He was, remember, Austria-Hungary, two kingdoms under one monarch. He was the first monarch, the first ruler, right? Now, let me just see something. What was the condition of Franz Joseph first by 1913? Okay. It says by 1913, Emperor Franz Joseph I was an elderly ruler, largely isolated by decades of personal tragedy, but who maintained a strict and demanding work ethic. Despite his age, contemporary accounts reported that his health was relatively stable, surprisingly those who had anticipated his decline. But so at this time he was, basically frail, elderly, right? Um, you know, who was Franz Joseph's heir, um, heir to the throne? Listen to this, okay? Franz Joseph's heir to the throne was his nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, because basically what you read about it, he had a son named Rudolph, but then Rudolph died. All right, then the emperor's younger brother named Karl Ludwig, right? He also died, right? Then Archduke, this guy Archduke Ferdinand, Franz Ferdinand, right? Well, it tells you right here. Franz Joseph's heir to the throne was his nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who became the heir presumptive after the death of Franz Joseph's only son. So he became the heir after the emperor's only son, Crown Prince Rudolph, in 1889, and after Franz Joseph's younger brother, Karl Ludwig, also died. See? But it says Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in 1914, leading to the succession of his grandnephew, Karl I, who was the last Habsburg monarch. But this guy, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he was assassinated, man. All right? And this Remember, you had the powder keg, Maine, the acronym Maine, but his assassination is what started. Um, that was a spark to World War I beginning. And once again, let me get the scriptures. You see how this all leads up now? All right, let me just get a couple more scriptures. All right, I'm gonna have to end it real quick. Isaiah chapter 45 and verse 7. It says, I from the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. See? So the Most High was working behind the scenes, man. He was, causing all of this drama over here in Europe to happen. Okay. Meanwhile, we was on the other side of the world getting our asses kicked, man. Okay. The Lord was still moving prophecy along. You see? And the Lord already prophesied by the mouth of John, the Revelator, John the Apostle, about this to happen. And his words then come back void. Isaiah 55 and 11. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. You see? So, the Lord already had, things, going on. All right. So this guy, Franz Ferdinand, he was the heir to the throne after Emperor Franz Joseph I, but he was assassinated. Okay. And that was the spark of World War I. Let me just get this. Why? Let me type this in. Why was Archduke Franz Ferdinand and assassination important? It says assassination of Franz Ferdinand was important because it was the immediate catalyst for World War One. See? And guess what? And now this is gonna be the end of part one. Okay. But who? It says Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist, assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo on June 28th, 1914. All right, and they, record this in here. Let's type in who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. All right, Gavrilo Princip. Let me just type this in. Who was Gavrilo Princip? All right, Gavrilo Princip was a Bosnian Serb nationalist. And remember, we went through this a little bit. An assassin who killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 28, 1914 in Sarajevo. This act of assassination is widely considered the catalyst that triggered the outbreak of World War One. Look, Princip was a member of the Young Bosnia movement and the Black Hand, which we went through before, a Serbian nationalist society that aimed to unite all South Slavs into a single, free state independent from Austria-Hungary. And I'm going to go into this more a little bit in the next part, okay? But basically, we got that background info, okay? We'll led up to it. So in the next part, I'll recall all of it. But you had the powder keg, Maine, all these European countries doing all these different things, which was just, going towards which was basically signifying that World War One was coming. They were building up their military, creating alliances, fighting over territory. They had nationalism going on. People all pro their country and looking down on opposite countries, right? But then, and because of all that nationalism, you know, you had Serbia. Serbian nationalism was rampant, which had, um, which had basically which because Serbian nationalism was rampant, you had secret societies made that were for that idea of Greater Serbia, right? And when Austria-Hungary added that area of Bosnia-Herzegovina to the empire, that angered them, okay? And so, it led to, which we're going to cover more in the next part, Lord willing, it led to the assassination of the heir to the Austria-Hungarian throne, right? It led to the assassination of the heir to that throne, whose name was Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And it was, he was shot, him and his wife were shot by this guy who was a Bosnian Serb nationalist, man. He was a nationalist, okay? He was all for that idea of greater Serbia. See? So that's basically it, man. All right. I know it's a lot of history, but this is just part one, Lord willing. I'm gonna put this in a playlist. Okay. Going to like the three woes and everything. So Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. Okay, just some, this is just part one of the first woe. Lord willing, this lesson was edifying, giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, every well, peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. Shalom to the elect.